Ta-da! We are now in business. Let me open up all my little screenies. And then we will get started. Sorry for the delay. Shrink that. Shrink that. All right, fabulous. All right, let's jump into today's lesson. So on this session of Rev Up, we're going to talk about writing and getting your offers accepted. If you remember before the break, we covered the beginning of the buyer process, right? The buyer presentation, showing properties, kind of how to weed out properties so that you're spending your time wisely. So we're going to pick up on that. So if you're like Amy, as we get started, you're like, it says step 7. What happened to steps 1 through 6? I actually think we start on step 8. Those were the last session. So you can tune into that to get caught up. But now we've taken our buyers, we've done the buyer consultation, we've gotten that buyer broker agreement signed, the BRBC, the buyer representation and broker compensation form. They've seen properties, they've identified at least one that they want to write an offer on. And now we are going to talk about writing those offers and getting offers accepted. So as always, as we dive through this, if you have any questions, feel free to just unmute yourself and be like, Amy, I've got a question. I do try to watch the chat box, as well as I do have the participant list in front of me that shows whether you're muted or not. So oftentimes if you unmute yourself, I usually notice. However, I can't guarantee anything because sometimes I get distracted. I'm working off 2 screens. I try to watch this screen the majority of the time because that's where the camera is. So it makes it look like I'm looking at you instead of away from you. So anyways, feel free to ask questions as we move along. So we've got our super excited buyer that's ready to write an offer. I'm just trying to get my screen to participate. There we go. All right. So here is the pending path. This picture kind of illustrates that kind of path that we take once we get an offer accepted. So we go from contract to inspections, repairs, lender requirements, title issues, close of transaction, and then move in. And that's kind of what we're going to be covering today. It's just this process from start to finish of getting that contract accepted through and actually beyond the move in point of escrow. Okay. Our job as we move through this path is to kind of be the chaos coordinator. It's to make this path as smooth as possible, not just for our clients, but for the listing agent and the seller as well. We want everybody to have a easy process. The more that we communicate, the better experience that the seller and the listing agent's having as we move through this process, the more likely that they are to agree to any repairs, requests, or anything else that might come up in the transactions, like extension of time or anything like that. Okay. And the main key always when we dive into real estate is communication. So just remember communication, communication, communication. You can never over communicate inside of real estate with your clients, with the listing agent, with the lender, with the title company. Just make sure everybody's in the loop every step of the way. And then oftentimes as we move through this process too, just know that I like to, if a problem arises, I like to come up with a solution before I communicate that oftentimes, or at least possible solutions. So it's not just I'm calling in a frantic, oh my gosh, there was all this stuff that came up. In the inspections, I've already kind of got some solutions in place and kind of know which direction we should go with those. So I like to kind of, again, coordinate that chaos so that people are made aware of the issues, but they also find solutions and find comfort in having those solution options available to them. All right, so we've located that house. Now we're going to prepare to write the offer. So the buyer is going to select the property, right? It's always up to the buyer. You can write offers on multiple properties at the same time. Okay. This is not my favorite course of action. Is it a material fact that the buyer has written multiple offers on properties? Probably so. So should you be disclosing that there's multiple offers out for one buyer to the listing agent? Probably so, but in California, that's kind of a gray area. In Idaho, you actually are required to disclose it. In California, it's a gray area, but you can write multiple offers. Just know that if you're writing multiple non-contingent offers, you could get your buyer into trouble really quick. So just make sure that if both offers were accepted or 3 offers were accepted on behalf of your buyer, that you have a clear plan of action to be able to exit one of those offers. Keep in mind that in our contract, it does say that the buyer's going to exercise good faith in moving forward with the transaction. So if you're writing an offer that you don't actually anticipate closing with, you're kind of in breach of contract from the beginning. But it is possible to write multiple offers on homes. I've done it multiple times. Again, it's not my favorite practice, but it's kind of hard, especially as the market begins picking up like it seems to, and you go back to where offers aren't being reviewed as received. They're being reviewed on a specific date, and you've got 3 properties that the buyer really likes that are all reviewing offers on the same day, and they're afraid that they may not get an offer accepted on one, that they want to be in the running for the other one. That's really where a lot of times it comes into play on that. So just kind of be aware of that. When we're preparing to write that offer, we always want to talk to the listing agent. Okay, we'll talk about what comes up in the offers and how to approach that here in a minute. But make sure that you're having communications with that listing agent. You're building relationship. Okay, you're going to prepare a CMA. It doesn't have to be like a full CMA or a comparative market analysis for that property they want to write an offer on, to see where the market value is of that property. What do we anticipate that this property is going to appraise for? What are the other properties that are similar selling for, right? What makes sense to write an offer? Because depending on the market, it might be that it got priced below market value. It might be priced way above market value. Kind of where's that property sitting? And what is your buyer comfortable moving forward with? And then we want to make sure that we communicate with our clients. Okay, find out what their wants, needs, and desires are. They're ultimately in charge of writing this offer. The terms that are in that offer are something they're going to have to live with probably for the next 30 years unless they move. Most likely the next 7 years, especially. I think that's the average right now for people staying in their homes. For the record, I've never stayed in a home for 7 years. I move a lot, but anyways, so communicate with those clients, find out what terms they're wanting to offer on, what's agreeable to them. Any questions on preparing to write the offer?
No, ma'am.
Fabulous. Here are some key areas of the offer. So in addition to price, right? Price is probably the most important, and days for close at escrow. Those are kind of our 2 main components of an offer. The following items come into play. That would be your loan terms, right? The amount of down payment, the loan type, if it is it FHA, VA, or conventional. We're going to put an interest rate down on there. Are they having more than one type of financing, like a first loan and a second loan, right? What's coming into play? That those loan terms are important. Also, we should always, before we write this offer, we talked about this in the last session, making sure we get a copy of that pre-approval letter from the lender. We talked about seeing if the lender could underwrite the file, pre-underwrite the file, so it's a fully underwritten pre-approval. Make sure you get copies of that, and always ask the lender to update it when we're ready to submit an offer. Okay, there's some strategic points there that you'll want to pay attention to. But the number one thing on that letter is going to show who is doing the purchase, right? Who the lender has doing the purchase, and what the lender has as their official legal names. You want the names on the offer to match what's on that pre-approval letter. Most of the time, your lender should have already run their credit, kind of gone through the file, so they know what that legal name is that should be on that offer. So I usually make the offer match the pre-approval letter, not the other way around. And keep in mind that if you have 2 buyers on that pre-approval letter, both buyers need to be on the purchase contract. Okay, both buyers need to be on there. You can't be on the loan and not be on the contract. You can add people later on. We'll talk about that in another session, but you can assign the contract to somebody and add them on there. But that's that information. You also want to verify with the lender the type of financing, what the interest rate is, and what the buyer's down payment is going to be. Okay, we want loan amount, down payment, interest rate, loan type, loan program. All of that can go on the contract. Also on the contract is going to go the good faith deposit. In Solano County, the average good faith deposit runs about 1% of the purchase price. So if you're purchasing a home for $600,000, that good faith deposit is going to be $6,000. Now keep in mind that that's going to come into play. right? So if it's a multiple offer situation, having a higher deposit might be more beneficial for your buyers. It might look stronger to the seller. Keep in mind that as long as you have contingencies in place, your buyers can cancel based on a contingency and get their deposit back instead of the seller retaining that deposit. And a good faith deposit over 3% really does you no good if your buyer is agreeing to the liquidated damages clauses, because that liquidated damage clause limits the amount the seller can retain of 3% or the good faith deposit, whichever is less. So if you did a 5% good faith deposit, really the same as a 3% good faith deposit. Okay. In addition, in that offer, we're going to have those contingency periods. There's 8 normal contingencies that come into play. You've got your loan, your appraisal. We'll cover this all when we go over the residential purchase agreement. You've got your investigation contingency, which includes physical inspections of the property, your review of seller disclosures, your review of leased and liened items, your HOA documents, your preliminary title report, your NHD report. So all those fall underneath those contingencies. Okay, we can change the date, the amount of time frame that we're allowed for contingencies. We can go in with removing contingencies, but all those are factors that are going to play into your offer. If you walk into a property and you know that the buyer is going to want to ask for repairs, or maybe the seller had pre-inspections done on a property, and there's, $7,000 of pest repairs, and you know that your buyer wants to have those repairs done, ask for them up front. Okay, it just makes for a cleaner process than getting into the contract, right? If we go into it knowing that the buyer is going to want some repairs, negotiate those up front. We can always negotiate more after the inspections, but if we put our buyer in the contract, we know they're going to want the seller to cover those pest inspection repairs. We don't ask for them up front. We spend money on an appraisal. We spend money on more inspections. Then we come back and do a repair request asking for those things we knew about up front. And the seller denies it. We've wasted money on a property unnecessarily that could have been negotiated up front. Okay. Obviously you can't negotiate repairs up front for things you don't know about, but things that you walk in that you know about, ask for those up front. And also keep in mind that if we negotiate on repairs on a purchase contract, the lender is going to want to see a copy of that report. So it's better to ask for it in a closing cost credit, potentially if they just want a credit for repairs, if the lender's not going to require them, so that we have funds to cover that versus necessarily asking for repairs if we're not going to get full clearance on something. Okay. Also, what's going to come into play are the fees, or who pays what, right? Who pays title and escrow, who pays NHD, who pays for the home inspection. And again, we'll go over kind of what's customary when we cover the residential purchase agreement tomorrow. We'll be focusing most of our time tomorrow on that grid for the residential purchase agreement. In addition to these normal terms that come into play, the additional things that are going to come into play are the seller's needs. If the seller needs a rent back or needs to be able to stay in the property after the close of escrow, if we're going to offer an appraisal guarantee, right? If we're going to say, hey, we're willing to purchase this property, even if it appraises for less than what we're offering on it, we can put in escalation clauses, which is something like, hey, we're going to offer at $550,000, but if a higher offer comes in, you show me proof of that higher offer, we're willing to go 5,000 over the highest offer up to 600,000, right? So we can put in escalation clauses. We can ask for buyer credits, right? Those would be to either cover closing costs. It could be to pay a loan point to bring the interest rate down, or it could be to help cover the cost of repairs. Keep in mind, we're talking about seller or buyer credits, right? Seller crediting the buyer some funds. If it's a cash offer, it really doesn't help our sellers or our buyers, not our sellers. It really doesn't help our buyers if it's a cash offer. So if we've got an all cash offer coming in, we would rather reduce the purchase price than ask for a credit, because it's going to be more advantageous for our buyers in the long run. However, if somebody's financing a deal and, we're asking for $500,000 with a $5,000 credit, or let's say a $10,000 credit, right, towards their closing costs, that gives the buyer $10,000 worth of funds to use towards their closing costs that would otherwise not be affected. If they were financing, I don't know, let's say they were financing 90% of the deal. If we reduce the price by 10,000, that's going to reduce their investment by what, like $900. So it doesn't really give them the same funds back if it's financed. So financed, we usually ask for buyer credits versus cash, we'll ask for a reduction in price. Okay, other things that might come into play is if there's a specific offer review date or if they're willing to accept preemptive offers, right? So if there's a specific offer review date, sometimes they'll review preemptive offers if you make it really stunning and amazing and something the seller couldn't pass up. You can get it reviewed before that specific date. So all of these things are items that you want to have a conversation with the listing agent about, not necessarily each individual item, but we want to find out what's important to the seller, right? So when I call an agent before I write an offer, we're going to find out, or do they have a specific date to review offers, or are they going to review them as received? Purchase price. I might ask if they've received any other offers in hand. If they have received other offers, asking if they're willing to disclose what the highest offer that they have in hand is. Sometimes agents will, sometimes they won't. Just so you know, in our listing agreement, it does give the listing agent permission to disclose that information, although most of them won't do it and they won't give you specific details. So then you could dive in further, like, are the offers that you have in hand at asking or above asking? Right? Give them something they can answer like yes or no to, or kind of a vague answer to. Oh, yeah, they're all over asking. Perfect. Are they way over asking or just a little bit over asking? If we came in, if it was listed at 550, if we came in at 555, how would that put our offer in comparison to the other offers that you've received? Right? So ask them questions like that. You may want to ask, have you received any cash offers? Do you have any other VA offers? Do you have FHA offers? Do you have any conventional offers? So, right. So most people, when they look at offers, they kind of view cash as king, right? That doesn't mean the cash offer is going to win because sometimes they're lower than at other offers. The next kind of favorite is going to be a conventional financing. So if I would say, hey, do you have any cash offers? They're like, no. Do you have any conventional offers? Right. That would be my next question, because those are going to be the next ideal financing type instead of a cash offer, because conventional offers usually have less strict requirements, right? So they're a little easier to get closed. It usually means too with a conventional loan that the buyer's got more money in hand or has a higher credit score, right? They're kind of in a better position to actually complete that purchase. So it goes kind of cash, conventional, and then you got FHA and VA. I'd probably put VA before FHA, only because FHA is for people that don't have a whole lot of funds and don't have great credit scores. Otherwise, they'd be going conventional. So, right. So we want to ask what kind of offers they have in hand. Does the sellers need anything to help their transition be smoother? Right. Was the house occupied or vacant? Would they like a shorter close of escrow, a longer close of escrow? Do they need some time to transition? Do they need time in the property after the close of escrow, right? That seller rent back. Right? Or my buyers need a credit. Do you think the sellers would be willing to accommodate that if the offer was right? Right? We can ask questions like that to feel out what that seller needs, what their wants and desires are, so that we can write an offer that's pretty straightforward. It's also a good time to ask, like, be looking at the tax records when you call that listing agent and be like, hey, I show here on the tax records, this is the seller's names. Is that accurate? Right? You can verify that information before you go to write the offer. You can always ask if there's any disclosures. Always check the MLS first to make sure that you've seen if there's a link to a disclosure site there on the MLS. And if there's not a link, then you can always ask if they have any inspections or seller disclosures on file so that your buyer can review those up front. The more that they can view up front, the better off you will be moving through that offer process. Any questions about that conversation with the listing agent or any of the items that come into play when getting ready to write an offer?
Amy, I have a quick question.
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Yep. Okay? On the escalation clause, how do you write, or where do you write that? Do you write it on an addendum, or do you write it on the contract, or how do you write that?
Yeah, so I would usually write it in under the other terms there at the very end of the grid is where I would put in that escalation clause, but it could also be done as an amendment to the contract, or not an amendment, an addendum to the contract as well. So either one would be the appropriate way to do that.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Any other questions before we move on? Alrighty. So we're going to make that offer, right? We're going to write up that offer. We're going to submit it. We'll talk about that here in a second. And we're going to negotiate that offer is step 8. So just keep in mind that you're rarely going to get a offer accepted that's in the buyer's, I can't come up with the word, in the buyer's, wow, brain dead. All right. Anyways, in favor of the buyer, there we go. Based on both price and terms, right? You'll usually get one, but not both. So it's always important to know what's more important to your buyer. Is it price or terms? And sometimes it's good to know that for the seller as well, right? Because sometimes sellers are really focused in on that price versus terms. And sometimes they're more concerned about the terms. Like, hey, we need to stay in this house for 45 more days before we can move. And that's more important to them than price, right? So it's important when we talk with both the listing agent and we talk with our buyers that we understand what is most important to both our buyer and to the seller so that we can work to get that offer accepted, right? Is it more important that for the price for our buyers, or is it more important that they get help with financing or they have funds available for repairs? Right. And then as we move through that negotiation period, just know that you may get counter offers in return. So we submit the offer that puts us in charge. Up until that seller either sends us back a counter offer or they accept or reject our offer, we can withdraw an offer. So if your buyer decides that they're no longer wanting to write on that property, we use what's called a withdrawal of offer form. You can do it verbally as well. In fact, I recommend that you verbally call that agent, let the agent know that, hey, we're withdrawing our offer. You can also send them a text message so you have tracking that you sent them it in writing, and then have your buyer fill out that WOO form, sign it, and then send it over to them for signatures and let the seller know officially that you're withdrawing the offer. Once the seller makes a counter offer, now it's like the seller is making an offer to your buyers, right? So initially we were making an offer to the seller. Now they're going to counter us and they're now making us an offer. It's going to be based on our original offer. So all those terms in the original offer are still valid, except for the items mentioned in that counter offer. Okay, so it's unnecessary on a counter offer, although most people do it, to write all other terms remain the same. Well, that's kind of a given. All other terms remain the same except what's on that counter offer. And the seller may choose to do either a single counter offer. It's called a seller counter offer. At the seller counter offer, what happens is they make a counter offer to you. You have the option to either accept it, reject it, or counter it with a buyer counter offer. If your buyers decide to accept that counter offer, you are legally in contract. Okay, once the buyer signs it and you electronically send it to the listing agent, that counts as the buyer's acceptance of that offer. They can no longer walk away from that. The sellers can no longer walk away from that transaction. Okay. Up until the point that that seller or that buyer accepts that counter offer, the seller then can withdraw the counter offer just like we originally could withdraw our offer. They would do it the same way. They'd shoot you over a text message or a phone call saying, hey, the seller's withdrawing the counter offer. And then they would send you over that WOO form, the withdrawal of offer. Okay. They may also do a seller multiple counter offer. So if the seller's received multiple offers, they can do a multiple counter offer back to several of the buyers in the transaction. The counter offers do not have to match. They may offer Leticia's client one thing, Anastasia's client another, and Lonnie's client something else. So they may have 3 different counter offers out there. And what happens with a multiple counter offer is that if your buyer accepts it, we send it back to the listing agent and we're not officially in contract until the seller makes a determination of which offer they're going to move forward with. So all 3 buyers may accept the counter offer. Then the seller is going to choose the one that's most favorable to the terms and conditions that they like the best. So until we get it back from the seller, then with it being accepted. We aren't officially in contract. So don't get super excited when you see a multiple counter offer. And again, with a multiple counter offer, it's the same as a regular counter offer. We can either counter it, we can reject it, or we can accept it. Okay, those are your three options there. Sometimes this is a good place as well. Once we receive a counter offer as a buyer's agent, I usually get on, if my buyer's not going to accept that counter offer as written, that's a good time to get on the phone with the listing agent again and have a conversation with them after you've talked with your buyer and say, here's what my buyer's thinking. Do you think this is going to be agreeable to your sellers? Right? I like to kind of verbally work it out so that we're not just ping-ponging back and forth with multiple counter offers, going from a seller counter offer to a buyer counter offer to another seller counter offer. I'm trying to save trees and eliminate paperwork. So I try to work it out verbally with the listing agent first before I draw up that buyer counter offer. So you can do multiple counter offers in there as well. And you can always reply with a counter to their counter. Any questions about making the offer?
No, we're good.
We're good. All right. With our offer, I often include a cover sheet, right? You can include a cover letter. I usually do this in the form of an email. So usually in my email, if that's how I'm submitting the offer, I would include this. Otherwise, I may use an official cover sheet if we were uploading it to like a Disclosures.io or a Homelight listing management site where we're uploading our offers electronically. In that letter, here's the sample. It says, "Dear listing agent, attached is my client's offer for your 1, 2, 3 Sample Street listing. I wanted to let you know that my clients intend to occupy their property as their family home. They have one daughter and another one on the way. They are also extremely well qualified with excellent credit scores, a substantial income and savings. Please feel free to contact their lender." That's where you would include the lender's name and company at their phone number with any questions. I've broken down the key points of the offer for you. Here they have purchase price, down payment, the financing type, close of escrow date, the escrow, title and escrow company, who this one has the appraisal. It's always paid for by the buyer, who's paying the home warranty, maybe the max cost for repairs, right? Any other terms that we have in there, you would include in this cover letter, anything that might worth them, right? If you had an escalation clause or an appraisal guarantee, please feel free to contact me with any questions. I look forward to working with you on a seamless transaction. Sincerely, and then your name, right? So you can tug on people's relational heartstrings in your cover letter. Now, keep in mind that if we include details about our buyers, then if the seller does not accept the offer, it could be construed as discrimination. So just be careful with how much you include in your sample letter, although because we're not actually giving it to the seller, we're giving it to the other agent, giving them details about our buyers could be beneficial because they might choose to share that information with their sellers, but they don't have to, right? So, so I usually do include information about my buyers, especially kind of a little bit about their life, like it said here, and then about their qualifications, whether it's been fully underwritten. Oftentimes, like if maybe we're making an offer at 600,000 and they're pre-approved up to 700,000, I might include that this property is not at the top end of their price range. So they have, just to show that they have more purchase power on top of that. Especially if it's a multiple offer situation, I might include that just so they know that, hey, we're really strong. Like we can go higher than this, that we're not like stretching to try to reach this purchase price, and include all those details. At the end, like this one does, where it says, I look forward to working with you on a seamless transaction. We're assuming they're accepting our offer. So I always go through it, assuming they're going to accept our offer. So it's not like, I hope we get to work on a seamless transaction. No, it's, I look forward to working with you on a seamless transaction, right? And we're going to send that over with our offer. Any questions about the cover letter for our offer? All right. Tips for communicating with the listing agent, right? We can call, email, text. You may want to include their assistant or their transaction coordinator, and always check the MLS for instructions, right? Does it say, like, even from the time you're setting up the showing, does it say call the agent to set up showing or text the agent to set up showing? Does it say who to text for questions? Does it say who to call for questions? Like, follow those instructions so that you don't annoy the listing agent up front. If you want to have a conversation with them regarding the offer or getting ready to write the offer, maybe even shoot them a text ahead of time, like, hey, Lonnie, I just wanted to touch base with you because we were getting ready to write an offer on your listing on Sample Street, and I wanted to connect with you first to talk over terms, right? When would be a good time to connect? That way we're not interrupting their day. They can be like, oh, give me a call in 15 minutes, right? So we can set it up that way. So it's always good to have communication with that agent up front. And they may prefer email, they may prefer text, they may prefer phone calls, depending on the agent. Or they may have like an assistant answering all the questions regarding the offer, right? Or regarding the property itself. And then always check those MLS for instructions. Any questions about communicating with the agent? Okay. Tips for handling difficult agents, right? There's some really stellar, fun agents to work with out there, and then there's some that aren't. And as Anastasia ran into today, you've got to remember that the agent is just working on behalf of their seller. And sometimes it's not the agent that's difficult. Sometimes it's the seller that's really difficult. And we can't be like, oh, sorry, my seller is being difficult. That would be confidential information that we shouldn't be sharing with a buyer's agent. So we just kind of have to roll with it. So just kind of keep that in mind. But you want to look at the big picture, right? Who do you represent? And then what is the outcome that you're working to achieve for the party that you represent, right? So how much do you have to endure? You have to decide, hey, is this a war of an ego? And how do I diffuse that? Right? Sometimes the agent on the other side of the transaction, may be rude, maybe aloof, maybe non-communicative, right? You can't get a hold of them. They won't return phone calls, emails, text messages. Maybe they're bullying you or criticizing you, right? You submit an offer to them and they call you up and be like, I don't understand why you did this, or I don't understand, like, this isn't how we do things, right? Super fun to experience. And we just have to remember that we just have to take it with a grain of salt. We never want to upset the listing agent, because ultimately we're trying to get this transaction into contract and closed for our buyers. And so sometimes you just have to take it and eat it and just kind of roll with it and be like, oh, I'm so sorry. You're right. I totally missed that box. I apologize, right? And just like move on. Or, well, I did it that way because I thought that even though in your area it's customary for the seller to pay escrow, we put that the buyer was paying escrow because it would be more appealing to your seller, right? So just having those conversations, trying to stay cool, calm, and collected. Sometimes it's better to be like, oh, hey, I'm so sorry. I've got another call coming in. I've been waiting for all day. Let me call you back in 10 minutes. Even if you don't have another call coming in, hang up the phone, take some deep breaths, and then call them back when you can have a constructive conversation, or they might be getting a little hot as well. So just like take a timeout, take some deep breaths, and then resume that communication. We always want to stay calm, which is the hardest thing to do. I promise. When somebody like comes at you combatively, it's really hard to stay calm. So sometimes we just need to take a break. Put your phone on mute, take a couple deep breaths, make some faces at your spouse or your kids that are sitting there in the room with you, whatever helps you to kind of calm down and diffuse the situation. And then remember that we can use the IVC, right? Which is investigate, validate, educate, and close, right? So we can use that just like we talked about using it with our buyers. We can use this with our listing agents as well as we combat them, right? So we can investigate, oh yeah, I'm so sorry that upset you. Can you explain to me a little bit more why that's important to your seller, right? Or why that's important to you, right? So ask for clarification, investigate, dig deeper, because it might be something they're not communicating very well. Then we want to validate. Oh, I can see why that would be upsetting to you. I can see that getting 10 offers in the last 5 minutes before you were supposed to review offers would be really frustrating. So sorry. Yeah, I understand now that it might take a little bit longer to get an answer back after you've reviewed offers, right? So just come with compassion. Okay. Investigate, validate, educate, and then close. Okay. Any questions about dealing with difficult listing agents? And remember oh yeah, go ahead, Maciel.
I've just heard people recently in the office say like there's agents that haven't really been responsive, and then somebody was like, go to their manager, like call and because like ultimately if you're trying to get your client into their house and they're not responding to like you being able to show the property or get information on it, like what else can you do? Like this is why we're agents, right? We're like supposed to be doing stuff for the client. So would you then just if that doesn't work out, then just reach out to broker?
Yes, absolutely. So, for sure, if you are having a problem getting a response from a listing agent, right, it's hard to work through IVEC or anything else if we can't even get them to pick up the phone or respond to a text message. So if I've tried a phone call, I've tried a text message, I've waited longer than 10 minutes, nothing makes me more irritated than somebody will call me and then they will hang up and then they'll turn back around and call Shannon. And then they'll be like, we've been trying to get Amy and we can't reach her. I was like, dude, you gave me like 2 minutes to respond to your phone call. That doesn't count as not reaching me. But anyways, so yeah. So, right. If you call, you text, you're not getting a response, you submitted an offer, haven't gotten an email back or a call or text saying they've received it. You've tried to get an answer from them, maybe wait 4 or 5 hours. We still haven't heard anything. Try them again. And then if you don't get them, see if there's like a co-agent, see if there is a office manager or broker that you can find out, because it may be like, oh my gosh, yeah, that agent unexpectedly went into the hospital and you're like, oh my gosh, is they gonna be okay? Right. So there could be like a legit reason, or they could just be overwhelmed. They really should have like a personal assistant helping them and they don't, and they're just not good at answering their phone and responding to messages. And so we need to bring that attention to somebody because we're trying to show the property, right? So it's okay to call the office manager after you've given them a chance to respond, but do give them a chance.
And so the last few offers that I've submitted, I've literally gotten I've gotten no response from the listing agent. They just let the days go by without saying anything. How rude is that?
It's really rude. Did they at least acknowledge receipt of the offer?
They did.
Okay. So you can always ask for proof that the offer was presented. On the last page of the offer, it does have a offer presented date, and then somebody has to initial it, usually the sellers. So you can always ask them to provide proof that the offer was presented to the sellers if you don't think they're being presented. If you're in a situation where you're like, there was 10 offers and yes, we acknowledged receipt and we just didn't get a rejected offer back or proof of presentation, then the offer was probably presented. But you can ask for proof of presentation. And if you just, they acknowledge the offer was received, it's been days, you haven't heard back from them, you've been trying to get a hold of the agent, nothing. Then that would be a situation as well where I would reach out to the office manager or the broker and just be like, hey, I talked with Jennifer 3 days ago and she said she received my offer. She said they were going to review them, but now I can't get a hold of her. I haven't heard back. I've got no response on my offer. I'm just trying to make sure if she's okay, or when I can expect a response on that offer. So it's okay to call the office manager or the broker at that point.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, absolutely. Right. And then do I want to be right or do I want to get the property for my client? So just remember, you've got to work with these people. It's not about the horrible agent on the other side. It's about having happy clients. And so getting through to that, it's okay to let them know as you're like, they're like, what's going on with our offer, to be like, hey, I got confirmation that the agent received it, but I haven't heard from the agent in 2 days. So if I don't hear from her by the end of the day today, then I'm going to reach out to her broker to see what's going on, to get a response on your offer. Just let them know and keep them updated. You don't want to badmouth the agent per se to your clients, right? We're not in the business of bad mouthing people, but we can let them know that, hey, I haven't heard, or, they haven't been able to get a hold of their seller, whatever it is, like, be truthful, but don't badmouth. Handling difficult buyers. We kind of covered this in the last session. Again, if you go through this process appropriately with the buyer consultation, setting expectations up front, meeting with the buyer, deciding to work with the buyer, you've probably decided that whatever level of difficult that buyer is, you're willing to take on, or you've fired them and let them move on to somebody else. Remember, you don't have to work with everybody. And even if you have a signed buyer broker agreement, you've gone and seen some properties and you're like, man, I just can't work with this buyer. It's okay to fire them at any time. So don't feel like you've got to be stuck with somebody just because you signed a piece of paperwork. That BRBC said that it can be signed by mutual agreement. So you can cancel that. We never want to talk a buyer into a home, right? When a buyer has an objection or concerns or starts getting cold feet, we want to determine if it's fear or if there's a legitimate objection there, like, right, what do we need to overcome? And again, we're going to use that IVEC method, that investigate, validate, educate, and close, right? To help walk them through their fears, walk them through a situation, outline, again, come into each situation with some solutions for them, right? If the pest inspection came back with $20,000 worth of repairs, like, that's a good time to talk about the fact that, well, we could get a credit, but, maybe you already had a conversation with their lender to know what their closing costs are. So keep in mind that when we start negotiating credits for our buyers, they can't exceed the amount of closing costs a buyer has. So we always need to be on the phone with the lender trying to work out what that max number is. And you may be like, hey, you can get, $13,000 in a credit, which would help offset those. And then we can ask for the remaining $7,000 in a price reduction. The price reduction, again, is not going to help them that much, but at least it gets all 20,000 of those pest repairs back to them. We can ask for those repairs to be completed prior to the close of escrow, right? Go to them with all of their options, which will help them to not be difficult. And then also, as you move through the transaction, try to think about what their objections might be moving into a situation so you can try to address those before they even have a chance to have the objection, right? So go into it helping to kind of clarify the situation and educate as you move through that process. Any questions about difficult buyers?
Why do I always get them?
Because you have a lot of Zillow leads and they're difficult by nature. Otherwise, they'd already have an agent that loves them, cares about them, and wants to work with them, and was following up with them after their last transaction. I'm just joking.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Most agents orphan their buyers, right? So you've got I think it's like 78% of agents never contact their buyers again after they close escrow on a property. And so they get orphaned. It's really sad, but that's why, you get all these people on Zillow and stuff that don't have any loyalty to any agents, and they start working with you, but it's hard to create that loyalty because they're like, well, my last one sold me a house and abandoned me. Like they don't understand how the process could work if they're working with a stellar agent. So it's a good opportunity to help kind of turn their viewpoint around. Okay. When we are getting ready to present the offer, we want to make sure that we include all related documents. So you're going to include your proof of funds, your lender letter, right? And again, I mentioned before that you want to make sure you get an updated lender letter for each transaction. And depending on the transaction is depending on what's on that lender letter for me. So if we're going in with multiple offers, oftentimes I get a lender letter that's whatever the max my buyers can afford is, right? We're already writing at or above asking, and I want to show that my buyers have a lot of purchasing power. So maybe they're pre-approved for $700,000, we're writing at $600,000. I may just go ahead and submit that letter with $700,000 on it so that that seller and that listing agent know that my buyers are very well qualified. Okay. If we're writing an offer, either like at or below asking, I want it to match that purchase price, right? If we're writing below asking, I don't want anybody to know that my buyers can purchase at $700,000 when we're offering $580,000. I want them to think that's their max. Right? If we're writing below asking, it's probably because it's not a multiple offer situation, and I want to kind of leverage and create a winning scenario for my buyers. So, right. So I'm going to adjust that lender letter depending on the situation and depending on what the offer is that we're submitting. You want to make sure you include any amendments or addendums, right? If we were clarifying that escalation clause on an addendum, make sure you include it. If it's got a septic or a well and you want the seller to do any investigations or inspections, right? So usually if there's like a septic system, the seller pays for pooping their own or pumping their own poop. We would include the septic, well, property, monument, and propane addendum, right? And then you can always include buyer letters. Okay, this comes down to, this is that really gray area. There's so much fuzz around its buyer letters. Most listing agreements now, they default to the listing agent will not submit buyer letters to the seller. That's the default on our listing agreement. That doesn't mean they won't. It just is what's on that listing agreement. We cannot encourage, please don't encourage your buyers to write offers or write letters for their offers. The reason being is that it could be construed as discriminatory, right? If they talk about that they have a family and the sellers choose a family over a non-family, then they might have been discriminating based on familial status. If there's a picture of them, now they've seen their ethnicity. They've probably already seen it because they were watching on the ring cam when you were showing the property, right? So it becomes very questionable very quick. So just kind of keep that in mind as well. But if your buyer wants to write a letter, I never tell them they can't. Okay, I will submit that. If that buyer wants me to submit a letter with their offer, I absolutely will submit it. I'll let them know that oftentimes they don't submit them to the seller, but that they're welcome to, and I will present it with their offer. Okay, so make sure you include all those things, all related documents. If the sellers have put their disclosures online, your buyers have reviewed them ahead of time, you can have those buyers go ahead and sign those disclosures and send them over with your offer as well. It makes it a little bit more complete. Just signing those documents does not mean that the buyers reviewed them and signed off on them. It does not review the, or does not remove the review of seller disclosures contingency because we sign them and return them. We still have the ability to be able to do that. You can submit your offers in person, right? You can let the listing agent know that your buyer would like you to submit the offer in person to the seller. It's not very common. It doesn't happen very often. I feel like it would make for a really awkward situation at this point in time since it's not done very often, but it could be effective. So you can always try that. You can even, the buyers could present the offer. They could go with you to present the offer, right? It just depends on what the situation is. And always check the MLS for instructions. Do they want those offers emailed to a specific email? Do they want them uploaded in electronic format to like HomeLight Listing Management or to Glide? How do they want those offers received? Oftentimes, if it doesn't have instructions in the MLS, I will either on the phone when I reach out to the agent ahead of time, or right before I go to submit the offer, I'll text the agent and say, what email would you like me, or how do you want me to submit the offer, or to what email do you want me to send it? Just to clarify, because sometimes the email they want you to send it to is not the email in the MLS. So I always clarify that. Also gives them a heads up that I'm getting ready to submit that offer. And again, just helps to solidify that relationship with communication. Once you've submitted the offer, make sure you alert the listing agent and confirm that they have received your offer. Okay, if you've submitted it electronically through one of those sites, just know that it might take a few hours for the listing agent to be notified that an offer has been submitted and to get back to you. So if it's one of those sites, you may want to give it an hour or two to hear back from them that they've received it before you shoot them over a text message and just say, hey, just let you know I submitted an offer on HomeLight Listing Management. Just wanted to verify that it did in fact upload appropriately, right? So just clarify that way, and that way they know that you submitted it through the right path or where you submitted that offer so that they can go look for it. They should confirm receipt of that offer. Okay, any questions there about presenting the offer?
No, ma'am.
Fabulous. All right, here's that pending path again, right? We talked about submitting that offer to enter into contract. Now we're going to walk through the remaining steps of inspections, repairs, lender requirements, title issues, close transaction, move in, and post close of the transaction as we move through the remaining steps. So starting with step 9, we have opening escrow. So once our offer has been accepted, right, we've negotiated it, it's now been accepted. Then we are going to open escrow. You want to email to copies to everybody who is involved. You want to do anything that's related to the offer. Any documents that are signed should always go to the other agent. Title escrow and the lender only gets documents that are contract related. So either the offer, counter offers, or amendments to the offer. Okay, we don't necessarily, title gets addendums. The lender doesn't always get the addendums. Okay, if it doesn't affect the terms of the purchase. Okay, so we want to make sure that title and escrow get a copy. We want to make sure that your transaction coordinator, and if there's a transaction coordinator that you know of on the other side for the listing agent, you want to make sure to send those back to the other agent or broker. You want to make sure your client got a copy of them, and you want to make sure the lender got a copy of them. Okay, in addition, especially for Realty One Group, you're then going to also upload those documents. We use SkySlope for compliance. So everything's going to go into SkySlope for compliance purposes, as well as we're going to forward all those emails. If you are using a transaction coordinator, then your transaction coordinator will do that for you. I do recommend that you do at least one transaction on your own, or maybe even sit down with the transaction coordinator or your mentor to go over and make sure you're familiar with SkySlope. That way, if anything happened to our transaction coordinator that you're using, you're not dead in the water. You know how to operate and move your file through compliance to get it to completion without any problems. Although I don't recommend that you coordinate more than 1 or 2 transactions on your own before hiring a transaction coordinator. That's going to be your first hire, and it's going to free you up to continue to lead generate and focus on the transaction instead of all the paperwork on the backside. Okay, so copies to everyone involved. Then you're going to send out to your buyers the earnest money deposit that they need to get it to the escrow company. I usually shoot the title company over the contact information for my buyers and ask them to send over the wire instructions. And then I let my buyers know to expect to receive communication from the title company. It's Old Republic Title Company or Placer Title Company or whatever it might be, with instructions on sending that wire, and they should verify with the title company before sending the wire. Okay, we always want to verify the wire instructions before sending money to make sure that we have the accurate ones. That's why we have that wire fraud advisory that goes out with the offer. And then the prelim or the title and escrow, when we open escrow, they're going to do a title search and give us that preliminary title report that Ben and Tiffany went over for us a couple of weeks ago. Okay, that's going to make sure that there aren't any red flags on the title and that it's an insurable title for our buyers to ensure that it's going to be clean and free of any liens or encumbrances that don't belong to them from the date that they close escrow. Any questions about opening escrow? All right. We also have our investigation period begins. If you have an inspection contingency or an investigation contingency, keep in mind that if you removed your inspection and investigation contingency with your offer, you went in with no contingencies, then we still have the right to have inspections and investigate the property. They can't stop you from doing that. Okay, so you still have this time period, even though you couldn't cancel based on the findings, or if you did cancel, you would lose your deposit. You can still cancel, you just lose your deposit because we don't have that contingency. But if you have that contingency, you can do them as well. So you're gonna, through that investigation contingency periods, there's several different contingencies inside of that. You're gonna have the opportunity to review seller disclosures. Those are gonna include things like the seller property questionnaire, the transfer disclosure statement, your listing agent avid, and your leased and liened items, as well as HOA documents, right? Anything that materially affects that property. You also are going to do your own agent visual inspection. We will have a field trip for this next week where we will be doing it hands-on in the field. Stay tuned for the address, but it will be at 11 o'clock next Tuesday. And again, we're just going to nail down the address for that one, where you're going to do a visually competent inspection of the property. I recommend doing this within 24 hours of accepted offer. We want to do it as close to accepted offer as possible. Your goal with that is to disclose any material defects that you find in the property that may affect the desirability of the property, as well as I use it as my statement of the condition of the property at time the offer was accepted, right? That's the best representation that we have of the condition of the property. Yes.
So should the listing agent have already done their avid on the property?
Yeah, so we don't, sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, we don't control when the listing agent does or doesn't do their avid. They technically should not do it long before you enter into contract, because there could be changes that happen to the property between the time that they do their visual inspection and the time that they, that it actually goes in the contract. So as a listing agent, I would recommend doing it the same way, about 24 hours, within 24 hours of accepted contract is when, as a listing agent, I also do my agent visual inspection disclosure. Some do it before. It just doesn't give you, as a listing agent, as much protection for your sellers as the condition of the property. If I'm like, well, there wasn't a hole in the wall, right? And there was, and the buyer's agent has proof of that. So both agents should do it as close to accepted contract as possible, but sometimes listing agents do it months in advance, and we just accept it and move on.
Copy that. Thank you.
Yep. I'll look and see when we cover the RPA tomorrow. It may specify in there the timing for that, but I'll double check on that. But some listing agents do it way in advance, or sometimes you don't get it until, like, right before your contingencies due. So be a good agent, not a bad agent. You also have time to review that natural hazard disclosure, right? That's NHD report. We covered that a few weeks ago as well with Britt with My NHD. You also have time to complete any inspections or investigation that your buyers may want to. Those include home inspections, pest, roof, pool, HVAC, hillside, soil stability, radon testing, lead testing, whatever you might want to do comes into play with those inspections. And they can do their own investigation that aren't formalized inspections. Things like just perusing the neighborhood at different times of the day, different days of the week, seeing what goes on in that neighborhood, making sure they're comfortable with the entire area that they're purchasing a home. So as long as that investigation contingency is in place, that they could drive by that house multiple times and be like, every time I drive by, that dog next door is barking and there's no way we can live with that. They can cancel based on that as long as that investigation contingency is in place. So they should fully investigate the property to the furthest extent. And that includes things like going to the building permit department and looking at building permits that were pulled. If that's something that's important to them, they can investigate the square footage, have somebody come out and mark the lot lines, right? Whatever's in there, they might want to do. Any questions
Yes.
about this investigation period?
So like, let's say your buyer's getting contract and before inspections are even going to start, they decided that they wanted to change their mind on it for whatever personal reasons, right? So how would you, like, how would me as their agent reach out to the listing agent to say that they no longer want to be in contract?
Yeah, I would just reach out to the listing agent.
Or what?
No, I wouldn't even. I would just say, hey, my buyers have decided that, they aren't happy with the area or the neighborhood or whatever, and they're canceling the contract.
Okay, got it.
Right. I wouldn't say they found a house they liked better, but so I would make it something to do with the property, but you don't even have to have official inspections on the property. You can just say that they just decided they don't like that area, or the floor plan didn't flow like they thought it was going to. They measured for their couch and it doesn't fit, right? Like anything like that works.
Got it. So something about the house or the area, something regarding the house, not something personal.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. 9C is the lender process, right? So we have all this going on at the same time. We open escrow, we have our inspections and investigation going on. The lender's working through their process they're going to send out initial disclosures for the buyers to sign. They're going to submit that file to underwriting, collect any additional documents they need for that initial underwriting period. Usually it's updated pay statements and bank statements. They're going to order that appraisal. So the lender's responsible for ordering the appraisal. They usually list the listing agent as the contact for the appraisal. So just make sure that you're in contact with that listing agent to let you know when it is scheduled. Once it goes through underwriting, they're going to kick out conditions, which is probably going to require your buyers to give them more documents, maybe write some letters of explanation. It might encompass signing a document because on their credit report, they have 5 different last names listed because people typed it wrong. Whatever that is, they're going to collect all those conditions and just make sure you're getting regular updates from that lender. So if you're not hearing from the lender, check in with them every couple of days and just ask how the file's moving along and where it's at. Okay, double check when the appraisal's been ordered. I always like to, you know, once the lender orders the appraisal, I like to let the listing agent know that, hey, just so you know, the appraisal was ordered today, or the file's in underwriting, just to keep them updated of the progress of the file as well. Any questions about the lender process? All right. Once we get through inspections, once the file's been underwritten by the lender, right, we kind of move through that first like week and a half period of time. We've got the preliminary title report, title's doing their thing. Then we're going to move into this wrapping up escrow period. This is where we're going to negotiate any repairs on a request for repair form. We can do that in the form of repairs. We can do it in the form of a credit or a price reduction. So there's several offers, or you can do a combination of all three. We're going to make sure our buyers are getting any final conditions to the lender once it comes out of underwriting, and see if the buyers need any help with that, or if the lender needs help getting things from the buyer, right? Our goal is to try to get this thing moving forward. So we're going to be in contact with that lender. If the lender's like, man, I'm just having a hard time getting this from them, like follow up with your buyers. Oftentimes they're way more responsive to us than they are to their lender for some reason. If anything's causing a delay, if we anticipate the appraisal coming back late, if during the inspections they recommended further inspection of another item and we need an extension of time, or something's going to cause a delay to the close of escrow, this would be the time to ask for that extension of time, either for a contingency or the close of escrow. And as long as everything's moving good, we're going to move towards removing any of those contingencies: loan, appraisal, and investigation contingency. Just so you know, oftentimes on this, I have my buyers sign that contingency removal, and then I hold on to it and sit on it. And I don't actually give it to the listing agent until they badger me for it, usually repeatedly, to the point that maybe they're on the verge of sending me a notice to perform. Right? Because I'm just going to leave that door open that if something happens, my buyers want to cancel, they can. So if nobody's badgering me for those contingency removals, I'll just sit on them. Once we're ready to remove all those contingencies, right? Once they're satisfied with the inspections, the appraisal comes in, we're good there. The lender says, yeah, we're good to go. That's when I recommend to my buyers that they give notice to their landlord that they're going to vacate the premise, as long as it's only a 30-day notice that's due. There's going to be a little bit of overlap there usually with their living situation, and that's okay. When they close on the property, like let's say we were closing on the property today, it's mid-April, and let's say they gave notice a week ago to their landlord, so they have until the first week of May to get out. So there's going to be some overlap there that close of escrow. Their first mortgage payment, if we close mid-April, isn't going to be until June 1st. So there's not going to have double payments on their mortgage and their rent. That's why I usually wait to give notice. Is it's easier to have overlap than it is to stay in a home that's already been rented to somebody else. Okay, I want to make sure that we're moving forward before they give that notice. During this period, we just want to make sure we're communicating. Hey, buyers, I touched base with your lender today. Everything's looking good. Or, hey, they still need this. We're going to touch base with the listing agent just to let them know that, hey, we're in the final stages of underwriting. We're hoping to be clear to close by the end of the week, right? So we just want to keep everybody updated and informed. When we keep everybody updated and informed, we're much more likely to get repair requests approved. We're much more likely to get extensions of times approved. Like all those things usually work in our favor a little bit better when we're being totally upfront and honest with everybody. Once we get through that, we are going to move into our finalizing of the transaction. This usually amounts to about the final 5 days. Unless you have an extended period of escrow, then this might all happen before 5 days prior to the close of escrow. But if we're moving on ahead, it's usually about the final 5 days. We're going to get that clear to close from the lender, and they're going to issue what we call a CD, or a closing disclosure. That gets sent electronically to our buyers. It has the final estimate of fees for our buyer to review and look at. It goes over what their loan payment's going to be, their balance, all that information is going to be in that closing disclosure. They have to electronically acknowledge the closing disclosure, and then we wait for 3 days before they can sign the documents to move towards the close of escrow. Okay, that's why the CD should be out 5 days prior to the close of escrow, if not sooner. During this time, once they've acknowledged that closing disclosure, that's a good time to get on the phone with title and escrow to let them know to schedule signing with your buyers. They can either sign in the escrow office if it's local to them. They can sign in their home with a mobile notary. They can sign at the coffee shop, a place of work, wherever that would be. So I always check in with my buyers, see where they want to sign, see what their schedule looks like. I usually give title and escrow an estimate like, hey, my buyers are ready to sign. I think you already have their phone numbers, but here they are again. They would like to sign at their house. Here's the current address. And ideally, they would like to sign tomorrow sometime as they're both off, right? So I try to give that summary. Then they schedule that signing directly with my buyers. The title company usually will send you over a closing statement to review, right? The buyer's closing statement, you're just going to go through that and make sure that they're not getting charged for anything they shouldn't. Like if the seller was supposed to pay for the home warranty, that doesn't show up on the buyer's side. If the seller was giving a credit, that you see that credit on there, just that everything looks normal. It takes a little while to kind of become accustomed to what normal should look like on a closing statement, but you'll get there. You're really just looking for like credits or costs that the buyer should have had listed on there. This final 5 days, that's also a good time for the buyers to start scheduling their utility dates for turn on for the property. So it's a good idea to have a list of those utility providers for each city so that you can provide that to your buyers. They know who to call for what and what needs to turn on. If you've got buyers that have always lived with parents or in an apartment, they might not even know that they need to turn on trash service. They might just think that's offered to them on a general basis, right? So make sure you let them know. The buyers also need to wire their final funds for closing. They should have that final on the estimated closing statement from the title company and on that closing disclosure from their lender. And I always recommend that they round up. So if the document shows that they need to come in with $12,642, I always recommend just wiring a even $13,000 to title, that they'll get the excess back. That way there's never any discrepancies or shorts. Okay, again, buyers should verify with the title company those wire instructions again before they send it, or they can bring a cashier's check to the title company. And then you're also going to do that final verification of property condition. That's your time just to make sure the property is in the same condition as the date that you put the offer in or the offer was accepted, and any repairs that were negotiated had been completed, and that the property is ready for occupancy. So this is kind of all what happens during those final 5 days. In addition to that, once the final documents are signed with that notary and the buyer wires the funds to close, then the lender's going to review all of those documents. They're going to do one final credit check. This is why it's important for our buyers not to take out and go buy a car with a loan or buy furniture or appliances on, 90 days, no interest prior to the close of escrow, because right at the last minute, the lender's going to check that credit report again to make sure there haven't been any additional inquiries into their credit. Okay. In addition, they're going to provide also a final verification of employment just to make sure they are still employed. Once they've reviewed those documents, done that credit check and reviewed the information with their employer, then they're going to send the wire of funds to the escrow company. Once the escrow has received those funds and they've given the thumbs up from the lender, they're going to release the file for recording, which means they send it over to the recorder's office, where it's going to officially be recorded that the buyers are the new owners of the property. And that's when the property closes, not when they sign the paperwork. That is a good time to send out those thank you cards to the title and escrow company, to your lender, to the agent on the other side, to the transaction coordinator, wherever those thank you cards might go. This is a good time to send those. Any questions about those final few days leading up to closing and the close of escrow?
Who do you want to send thank you cards to again?
I would recommend sending them to all parties involved in the transactions, the transaction coordinator, the agent on the other side, title and escrow. You may even send thank you cards to any of your inspectors, maybe to the appraiser, right? To anybody that's involved in that transaction, send out thank you cards, build relationships.
Copy that. Thank you.
Absolutely. All right. That's when your buyer is going to take possession of the home, right? So once you're on record, our contract defaults that the buyer is going to get keys upon notice of recording. So you will want to arrange once the title company, once the lender says, hey, we've sent funds, or the title company says, hey, we received the lender's wire, we're released for recording. that's a good time to contact the listing agent and talk about, hey, once we're on record, I'm going to pull the keys out of the lockbox. Are there any additional keys or remotes? Where can I get those? Right. Usually most people put them like in a drawer in the kitchen. And then you also go ahead and kind of schedule a time with your buyer to meet them there, to present them with keys, maybe take a picture. If you've got a sign that says, I found the one, or it's sold. Buyers like those type of pictures there in front of their house holding their keys. So that's a good time to do that. You may want to warn them in advance that you're going to take pictures. They come appropriately. Sometimes they show up for keys because they've been trying to like scrub their apartment to get out of there. And they don't want those pictures posted online. So just warn them in advance. And, just make sure that you don't solidify when they're going to get keys up until that time that you've been given the notice that it's actually been sent to recording, because something might happen in the last minute to cause a delay. It's also a good time, right, as you're moving towards that, you're verifying how you're going to get keys and remotes to make sure the seller's actually moved out, right? Hey, is the seller out? Are we ready to go? Like, we should have notice of recording tomorrow morning by 8 a.m. Just making sure that we aren't going to have any problems. Right? So there's that. Post-close escrow is a good time to have a post-close plan of action, right? So if you have a system in place for after the close of escrow, then we can make sure all of our clients are treated equally and that we are creating clients for life and getting repeat and referral business. So some things that you want to include in your post-close system would be updating their address in your CRM or your contact relationship manager. They have a new address now. You want to make sure you send them the home warranty information after the close of escrow, because they'll lose it you've probably sent it to them for signatures during the transaction, but it's always good to send them the final copy after the close of escrow so they have it. Maybe even with the brochure of what it covers. You can download like a PDF version of that, or a link to the website for that home warranty company where they can create a login and file claims and such. Your closing gift, I usually recommend sending the closing gift to them if you're going to do one about a month after the close of escrow. It gives you a good ability to check in with them and follow up. And also they're super excited about getting keys when they get keys. So that's all they really need at the close of escrow. So showing up a month later or a couple weeks later with a gift, that's a good time to ask for reviews and referrals. Which is next on our list. And then also in January, it's a good idea to send all of your closings for the previous year a copy of their closing statement. That way, when they get ready to file their taxes, they have all of that information in front of them with the finalized closing statement.
Where do we get the closing statement from? Through here?
Yeah, so when you have a closing, the title company usually at the end will email you a copy of the final closing statement and the FIRPTA, whether they're foreign or not, for tax withholding purposes at the close of escrow. So you can always like keep a folder in your email box with those, or they all get uploaded into SkySlope as well. So as long as you have access to SkySlope, you can log in January, pull up all your transactions for the previous year in the archived section and print off copies, download and print off copies, or email them to the buyers and sellers. In addition to that, once you kind of run through your post-close system, then you want to add them into that 36 plus touch plan that we keep talking about when it comes to your database to help get repeat and referral business, right? It's 36 or 19 to connect and then 36 to convert. We are going to phone call them once a quarter. You're probably going to text them once a quarter. Make sure you interact with them on social media at least once a quarter, send out that monthly newsletter. You're going to add them maybe to your monthly market report inside a Real Scout, where they're getting updated of the neighborhood information for the neighborhood in which they just purchased the property, right? Invite them to activities and events, send something in the mail to them a couple times a year, drop something off on their doorstep, right? Lots of things you can do there. Fabulous things. Make sure you mark in their home anniversary, right? They just closed. You can put their home anniversary in that CRM and send them an anniversary card each year. So lots of things can be done. Any questions about that, creating clients for life, the follow-up plan for buyers? Fabulous. Then that it concludes our lesson on writing offers and getting your offer accepted. Make sure you're doing your one habit of 3 phone calls or 3 conversations a day about real estate, adding 3 people to your database, and sending out 6 notes or thank you cards on a daily basis. You can always up that to 10 for faster results. And we'll be back tomorrow to go over the residential purchase agreement. We'll probably focus in on that grid section, which is the section that actually gets filled out with that residential purchase agreement tomorrow at 11 o'clock. Anybody have any questions or need anything before we log off? And the attendance link is in the chat box.
Thank you, Amy. I want to ask you something really quick. Where do we find like sellers and buyers and sellers like packages? Is there like a place? I know you said on the one zone, but
Yes.
I don't know where.
They're hidden. So in the zone, they don't want you to actually find them. So hold on just a second.
No wonder. I didn't find them. They were hidden really
see?
well.
Super sneaky. Hold on, because I actually
Yes.
have to. If anybody has any other questions while I look this up, you're welcome to ask those questions. All right, I'm just going into one zone because I think this is where it's at. Oh, I'm still on my phone. Let's see if my I had problems with my connecting to Zoom. So
Hey, Amy, are
I
you
had to connect to my phone, even though our internet's working.
Amy, are you familiar with Boomtown, the new CRM? Are you going to be using it?
I am not familiar with Boomtown, but I will get familiar with it and teach on it for sure.
Okay, perfect.
That's
How's that
awesome,
for now?
You can start now.
We're
You
not.
can start now, but I was like, I'll wait for you to start teaching us.
No, hold on, my phone's being packed.
It always happens after vacation, Amy. It's still in vacation
All right,
mode.
so here
Oh, that's horrible.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was me or hers.
It's her.
marketing
Amy, it's horrible. We're hearing is
listing presentations are there.
Yeah. That's
And
all
I
we're hearing.
believe that the listing and buyer presentation is there.
I'm
Yes.
sorry. I think I missed the whole thing, Amy. It was just like cutting off.
Her screen is still frozen too.
So it's on the.
I think that's her way of saying class is over.
I guess.
Yeah, well, you
I
can
guess.
see there on the left under marketing, it goes listing presentation. So maybe you
So
can try to.
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
So you went on the one zone and then you go on. What was that after the one zone? Where do you go after that?
If you can hear me, you go one zone, then marketing, and then it's
Okay.
there. Zone, marketing, then listing presentations. And then I
Got it.
think there's a buyer presentation inside of one design, but I'll look and I'll put it in the group me.
Sounds
Oh,
good. Thank
I
you.
might be officially back. Can you guys hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. I can hear
Oh,
you.
good. Oh, good. My internet's been restored. All right, so that's the listing presentation. I think there's a buyer presentation in the one design.
Okay.
It's either
So
in,
it'll be okay.
yeah. We'll look there and we'll look.
Okay, I will look, and you know what? It's always fun to look on the One Zone. I even found some presentation or some material that you can print it on in Spanish too.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah,
I
but
mean,
I
that would
just
do me
couldn't find
no
the.
good, but
Yeah, no, but for me, yes, for me it would.
yeah.
So it was awesome. Yeah.
See. Cool. Well, thanks for joining me. I was just looking to see if there was a buyer inside of One Design. But yeah, check it out and let me know if you have any further questions or have problems finding something.
Thank you, Amy. You're awesome.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
All right. See you later.
Bye.